they would have had to have been much more responsible and responsive to the people. Had there been that extra layer of checking and guarding against national power.
Where did his drive come from? Washington seemed to just want to get back to the farm and to be an honorable man. Jefferson was just an explorer, I think, an explorer on everything. Who was he?
Well, the first thing he wanted to do is, a lot of people came to the convention wanting to fix a broken government system. He wanted to do something epic, historic. He wanted to build a republic that would last for generations and decades. And he had studied every republic that had ever existed in the history of the world, and he believed that he had figured out a formula. Part of that formula was enumerated powers, not general powers, and decentralizing power.
Do you guys, does it bother you? When people would used to say, oh, we're a democracy, I'd roll my eyes because somebody would inevitably say, no, we're a republic. You'd be like, okay, I get it, shut up. But now it really drives me crazy because we're not a democracy, and there is a concerted effort by the progressives to make us a democracy. These guys believe, when he studied all the other republics, he and Jefferson were very, very clear. Democracies never work, and republics always had fatal flaws, right? And so when he came to the Constitutional Convention, describe the scene a little bit. What was this like? They nailed the shutters closed, right?
Yeah, it was a secret meeting because they were afraid that if it was public, then if somebody made a speech and took a position, then they couldn't change their mind.
So it was like the Bilderbergers.
Right. And they actually laid sod out in front of the street so that when the carriages went by, it was quiet, nailed the windows shut, and for 4 months, those 55 men just stayed in that room and deliberated, unlike what we do today.
Because he had, 100 pounds, 5'4". I hear he had a kind of a mousy little voice, right?
A Frenchman once called him Mr. Mutterson.
Mr. Mutterson. Was he a pleasant fellow at all?
He was known to have a very sweet temperament. He was very quiet, very shy. And so he often had to be asked to speak up when he was on the floor of the House or in the convention and so on. But among his family and his close friends, he was actually quite humorous. He loved his nephews and nieces.
Because the thing that I have seen is, and again, I know very little about him, and I'm ashamed to say that, but what I do know is when he came to the convention, if this history is right, he was absolutely convinced, no, I have the plan. This is the plan, no deviation from it. And so he seems like he was a royal pain in the ass because he was... Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right.
Because he was like, no, wait, I think we should do, no, this is it. This is the plan, right?
Yes, he stuck with what he thought was a correct plan long after many other people at the convention had changed their mind. For instance, Sherman came and convinced him to have 2 senators per state, which was another thing to improve states' authority and control over the federal government, and he fought long after everyone else, including Washington, had agreed to the 2-state compromise, but he wanted it by population.
I'm going to disagree with you guys just a little bit here. Right. I'm sure that's why you have a woman on the show. I don't think he was a know-it-all. He did know a lot, and he was confident in what he knew, but he wasn't like John Adams, where John Adams actually was a bit of a know-it-all, and therefore offended people. Madison was very well liked.
When I say in this particular, I don't mean that he was a know-it-all, like you just have to take my... He had done, geez, have you seen the letters he wrote back and forth? He had done his homework. He did know, if not all of it, most of it, where... when you're put in a situation where you have done that much homework, you can kind of get a little testy with people who are like, no, wait, Because I don't know if anybody else has ever been in a meeting before where you've worked really hard on something, and there's some yahoo that you know has just been at the, the candy, the candy machine for the last 3 weeks while you've been working, and they'll get in the meeting and go, well, I think that's a dumb idea. And you're like, shut up, candy man. You haven't been working. This guy really worked. So he did know, what he was talking about when it came to republics. What did he find with the republics that was the fatal flaw?
He believed that the fatal flaw was factions. He called them factions. We call them special interests. And everything that he did in the design of a government was an attempt to diminish the ability of factions or alliances of factions to take over the levers of government.
And the problem with faction, particularly majority faction, if you have a country based on the idea of majority rule, is that any fleeting passion can almost immediately become law. And so Madison, what he wanted to do was not take away the idea of liberty to make our own choices and to make mistakes even, and how we might think through things, but to develop a system of refining and enlarging the public views so that the people themselves ultimately are the rulers, and it doesn't have to be abdicated to the few who form the government.
These guys he would be crazy with anybody who said, well, it's very complex and you won't understand it. That's what you hired me to do, wouldn't he? He'd be crazy on a politician saying that.
True believer in the idea of self-government. That's what he dedicated his entire life to.
These guys, because Jefferson said pretty much the same thing when he was talking about the constitutional amendment system. He said, you got to amend it. And I think the amendment system is so brilliant because, for instance, prohibition. That amendment is still there, plus the repeal. So when you look at the Constitution, you're like, oh, really? We banned alcohol. That didn't work out well. The scars are left there. And I think it goes to what Jefferson said, and I think I'm hearing the same thing from Madison, that the people trust the people. They're going to make mistakes, but they'll eventually get it, and they will correct it. Right now, we live in a situation where everything was with the last president, is with this president, it's been with presidents in the past. It becomes an emergency. Got to do it. Got to do it. And you don't even read it. And so it just goes through. And it wasn't everything that he did basically a roadblock or a speed bump?
He wanted to slow things down and allow for the communication between the representatives and their constituents in the newspapers, circulating, he said, throughout the entire nation, so that we take time to think about these things, to have second thoughts, so that the judgments we might come to are more reasonable. Jefferson once said, the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, but that will to be rightful must be reasonable, because the minority have their equal rights, which government must protect. So it's that idea of deliberation, as Jim put it. What we don't want to do is what happened in ancient Greece, Madison says in the Federalist Papers, which is to make the philosopher drink hemlock on one day and erect statues to him on the next.
Back in just a second. With Colleen Sheehan. She is a professor of political science at Villanova University and author of James Madison and the Spirit of Republican Self-Government. James Best is also here, and he is the author of Tempest at Dawn. Jim, we were talking about checks and balances, that everything had a counterpart to make sure it was always balanced. And really the fail-safe here was the press. The First Amendment, freedom of the press. Did they foresee a time when the press wouldn't do their job?
No, I don't think they ever foresaw a time like that. I mean, the whole ratification process, there were the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers. There was open debate on both sides in the press, and everybody in America was talking about this for over a year. I mean, it was the sole subject of discussion. Maybe they talked about the weather occasionally, but if they got together in a tavern, They had been reading about it in papers, both sides of every issue, and I don't think they ever would have foresaw a situation where they only would have got one side of the story unless they went out and searched for the other side.
We have